Wild Roses on the Frontier by Evelyn Merrick. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the main street of Willowbrook as Catherine Montgomery stepped down from the stagecoach. Her legs ached from the journey, and she couldn't help but grimace as her boots touched the unpaved road. After weeks of travel from Philadelphia, she had finally reached her destination, a small but growing town on the western frontier. "Welcome to Willowbrook, miss," the stagecoach driver said as he handed down her trunk. "Town's not much to look at, but good folks live here." Catherine nodded her thanks, surveying the single street lined with wooden structures. The town was indeed modest. A general store, a saloon, a small church, and various other establishments stretched before her. It wasn't Philadelphia, but it represented something far more valuable, a fresh start. At 24, Catherine had left behind everything familiar. Her father's death 6 months prior had released her from obligations that had kept her tethered to a life of dull social engagements and unwanted suitors. With her modest inheritance, she had purchased part ownership in Willowbrook's only hotel, sight unseen. "You must be Miss Montgomery," a voice called out. Catherine turned to find a woman approaching, perhaps in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back into a practical bun. Despite the frontier setting, she maintained an air of propriety in her simple blue dress. "Mrs. Palmer?" Catherine extended her hand. "A pleasure to finally meet you." "Indeed, my dear. Your letters hardly prepared me for how young you are." Mrs. Palmer's eyes squinted with warmth. "Come along now, you must be exhausted." They walked toward a 2-story building with a painted sign reading Willowbrook Hotel. The establishment looked sturdier than many of its neighbors, with a fresh coat of white paint and green shutters. "We've prepared the corner room for you," Miss Palmer said as they entered. "It has the best view of the mountains." The hotel's interior was simple but clean, with polished wooden floors and modest furnishings. A young man looked up from behind the front desk and nodded politely. "That's Thomas, my nephew," Mrs. Palmer explained. "He helps with the heavier tasks." Catherine smiled at the young man, noting his boyish features. "I'm pleased to meet you, Thomas." "Likewise, Miss Montgomery," Thomas replied, his voice cracking slightly. He couldn't have been more than 16. Mrs. Palmer led Catherine upstairs to a modestly furnished room. A bed with a patchwork quilt occupied one corner, while a small writing desk sat beneath a window overlooking the distant mountains. "It's lovely," Catherine said, genuinely pleased with the accommodations. "Rest now," Mrs. Palmer suggested. "Tomorrow I'll show you everything about running this place." Alone in her room, Catherine unpacked her few possessions, arranging them carefully in the wooden dresser. She placed a framed photograph of her father on the nightstand, his stern face looking back at her. She wondered what he would think of her now, so far from the life he had envisioned for his only daughter. "I'm making my own way now, Father," she whispered to the photograph. Sleep came quickly that night, deep and dreamless. The next morning, Catherine awoke to the sounds of the town coming to life. After dressing in a practical navy skirt and white blouse, she made her way downstairs, where Mrs. Palmer was already serving breakfast to several guests. "Ah, there you are," Mrs. Palmer greeted her, just in time to learn about the morning rush. Catherine spent the day learning the hotel's operations, from changing linens to tracking reservations in the large ledger. By evening, her hands were raw from work they had never done before, but she felt a sense of satisfaction previously unknown to her. "You're a quick learner," Mrs. Palmer commented as they shared tea in the hotel's small kitchen after the day's work. "Most city ladies would be crying for their maids by now." Catherine smiled. "I've never been one to shy away from hard work, Mrs. Palmer, though I admit my previous definition of hard work has been thoroughly revised today." Their conversation was interrupted by the kitchen door swinging open. A tall man in a dusty riding coat entered, removing his hat to reveal dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. His face was tanned and weathered, with a strong jaw partially covered by a short beard. What struck Catherine most were his eyes, a clear, penetrating blue that seemed to take in everything at once. "Daniel," Mrs. Palmer exclaimed, "we weren't expecting you back so soon." "The cattle drive finished earlier than planned," he replied, his voice deep and resonant. His gaze settled on Catherine with evident curiosity. "This is Miss Catherine Montgomery, our new partner," Mrs. Palmer explained. "Miss Montgomery, this is Daniel Harrington. He owns the ranch just outside town and is one of our regular boarders when he's not on the trail." Catherine extended her hand. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Harrington." He took her hand briefly, his calloused palm rough against her skin. "Miss." He nodded, then turned back to Mrs. Palmer. "I'll be needing my usual room for a few weeks, if it's available." "Of course," Mrs. Palmer assured him. "Thomas can take your things up." Daniel shook his head. "Just this saddlebag. The rest is coming with the wagon tomorrow." He glanced at Catherine again, his expression unreadable, before taking his leave. "Don't mind his manner," Mrs. Palmer said after he had gone. "Daniel isn't one for many words, but he's as dependable as they come. His ranch employs half the men in this town." Catherine nodded, still feeling the impression of his hand against hers. "He seems formidable." Mrs. Palmer chuckled. "That he is. Came out here 10 years ago with nothing but determination and built one of the most successful ranches in the territory." She paused, studying Catherine's face. "He lost his wife 5 years back. Favor took her. Hasn't shown interest in remarrying, though plenty have tried to catch his eye." Catherine felt a slight flush rise to her cheeks. "I wasn't." "Of course not, dear," Mrs. Palmer said with a knowing smile. "I'm simply filling you in on our regular guests." Over the next 2 weeks, Catherine settled into the rhythm of hotel management. She discovered an aptitude for organization that complemented Mrs. Palmer's practical knowledge of housekeeping. The work was demanding but rewarding, and Catherine found herself enjoying the simple pleasures of the frontier town. The clean mountain air, the friendly nods from townspeople who quickly accepted her presence, the spectacular sunsets that painted the western sky. Daniel Harrington remained at the hotel, taking his meals at regular hours and spending his days at his ranch or in meetings with the town council, where he apparently held significant influence. He spoke little, but Catherine often felt his gaze following her as she moved about the dining room. One evening, as Catherine was balancing the hotel's accounts at a corner table in the empty dining room, Daniel approached her table. "Miss Montgomery," he said, standing stiffly before her. "May I join you?" Surprised, Catherine gestured to the chair across from her. "Of course, Mr. Harrington." He sat down, placing his hat on the table. A moment of silence stretched between them before he spoke. "Mrs. Palmer tells me you've bought into the hotel. That's unusual for a woman traveling alone from the East." Catherine straightened her ledger. "I suppose it is, but I found myself in unusual circumstances." "May I ask what brought you all the way to Willowbrook? It's hardly the kind of place Eastern ladies seek out." "Freedom, Mr. Harrington," she answered honestly. "My father passed away, leaving me with some means but few prospects in Philadelphia. I could have married, of course. There were several gentlemen who expressed interest, but none who saw me as anything more than a decorative accessory." Daniel's eyebrow raised slightly. "And you want more than that?" "I want a life that's my own," Catherine said simply. "Here, I can build something, contribute, make decisions without requiring a man's approval for every trifling matter." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "You've certainly chosen the right place for that. The West doesn't much care about Eastern conventions. It's what a person can do that matters here." "And what brought you here, Mr. Harrington?" Catherine asked, curious about the man who revealed so little of himself. His eyes grew distant. "Similar reasons, I suppose. A desire to build something of my own." He paused. "I came from Boston originally. My father was a merchant who expected me to follow in his footsteps. I had different ideas." "It seems you've succeeded admirably," Catherine observed. "It wasn't easy," he acknowledged. "The first years were," he trailed off, then continued more firmly. "But yes, the ranch is doing well now." Catherine sensed there was much more to his story than he was sharing, but didn't press. "Mrs. Palmer mentioned you sit on the town council." Daniel nodded. "Someone needs to ensure Willowbrook grows properly. There's talk of the railroad coming through next year. It would change everything." "For the better?" "For some," he said carefully. "Progress brings opportunities but also new challenges. Not everyone welcomes change." Their conversation was interrupted by Thomas entering with a telegram for Daniel. He read it quickly, his expression darkening. "I need to return to the ranch," he said, rising. "Thank you for the conversation, Miss Montgomery." Catherine watched him leave, intrigued by the glimpse beneath his reserved exterior. The following day brought unexpected excitement to Willowbrook. Catherine was arranging flowers in the hotel lobby when the door burst open, and several men carried in an injured worker from Harrington's ranch. "What happened?" Mrs. Palmer asked as they laid the man on a sofa. "Rockslide caught him while checking the north pasture fence," one of the men explained. Mr. Harrington sent us to fetch the doctor, but Doc Wilson's out at the Miller farm delivering a baby. Bring him to the kitchen, Catherine instructed, quickly assessing the situation. Thomas, run to my room and bring down my brown leather case. In the kitchen, Catherine examined the man's injuries, a badly broken leg and several deep cuts. During her father's illness, she had learned much about nursing and had brought medical supplies, anticipating that such knowledge might be useful on the frontier. I can't set the bone properly, she explained to Mrs. Palmer, but I can clean and dress these wounds and make a temporary splint until the doctor returns. Catherine worked efficiently, washing the wounds with carbolic solution and applying bandages. She had just finished fashioning a splint when Daniel Harrington entered the kitchen, his face tight with concern. "How is he?" Daniel asked, looking from his injured worker to Catherine. "The leg is broken, but the bone hasn't punctured the skin," Catherine explained. "I've cleaned the wounds and set a temporary splint. He'll need the doctor to set the bone properly." Daniel studied her handiwork with evident surprise. "You know medical care?" "My father was ill for a long time before he passed," Catherine said. "I learned what I could to ease his suffering." She didn't add that her father had prohibited her from calling the doctor until it was too late, believing his daughter's care should be sufficient. "Thank you," Daniel said, a new respect in his eyes. "Doc Wilson won't be back until morning. Your care may have prevented infection." Catherine dipped a cloth in cool water and placed it on the injured man's forehead. "He should rest here tonight. We can move him to a room." Together they carried the worker upstairs to an empty room. After settling him with medicine for the pain, Catherine found herself alone with Daniel in the hallway. "You're full of surprises, Miss Montgomery," he said quietly. "As are you, Mr. Harrington," she replied. "I heard you carried him half a mile after the accident." A flush colored his tanned cheeks. "My men are my responsibility." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who took their duties seriously. "I should return to the ranch," Daniel said finally. "Would you ride out tomorrow? To check on Peterson's recovery?" "Of course," Catherine replied, surprised by the invitation. "I'd be happy to." The next morning, Catherine rode out to the Harrington ranch on a gentle mare provided by the livery stable. The ride took her through rolling grasslands where cattle grazed peacefully under the watchful eyes of cowboys. The ranch house itself was larger than she expected, a substantial two-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Daniel met her at the main house, looking different in his home environment, more relaxed, though still carrying the air of authority that seemed inseparable from him. "Miss Montgomery," he greeted her, taking the reins of her horse. "Thank you for coming." "How is Mr. Peterson?" she asked as he helped her down from the saddle. "Better, thanks to your care. Doc Wilson came by at dawn and said you'd done everything right. Set the bone properly, and said the wounds were so well cleaned there's little risk of infection." Catherine smiled, pleased by the report. "I'm glad to hear it." "I'd like to show you something if you have time," Daniel said, an unusual hesitancy in his manner. "Of course." He led her around the main house to a garden enclosed by a low stone wall. Within the enclosure bloomed an astonishing variety of flowers, roses in several colors, daisies, sunflowers, and many Catherine couldn't name. "It's beautiful," she breathed, taking in the unexpected sight. "My wife started it," Daniel said quietly. "After she passed, I couldn't bear to let it go wild. It seemed disrespectful somehow." Catherine touched a pale pink rose gently. "You've maintained it wonderfully." "One of the ranch hands has a way with plants," Daniel admitted. "But I come here often." He hesitated, then added, "I haven't shown it to anyone else." The significance of his admission wasn't lost on Catherine. "Thank you for sharing it with me." They walked among the flowers, Daniel naming the varieties he knew. Catherine was struck by the tenderness with which this outwardly stern man tended to something so delicate. "Would you stay for lunch?" he asked as they completed their circuit of the garden. "Nothing fancy, but my housekeeper makes decent biscuits." Catherine accepted, and they spent the afternoon in conversation more relaxed than any they'd previously shared. Daniel spoke of his early struggles establishing the ranch, and Catherine told him of her life in Philadelphia, the stifling expectations and the relief of finally making her own decisions. "My father wanted me to marry the son of his business partner," she confided. "A man twice my age who viewed a wife as little more than a possession to display at social functions." Daniel's jaw tightened. Then I'm glad you found your way here instead." As the afternoon waned, Daniel walked her to her horse. "Would you consider coming to dinner next week?" he asked. "I've invited the town council and some of the prominent citizens. Having the hotel's new owner present would be appropriate." "I'd be delighted," Catherine replied, warming at the thought of seeing him again in a social setting. He helped her mount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Until then, Miss Montgomery." The evening of the dinner arrived, and Catherine dressed with particular care in her finest gown, a deep blue silk that her father had purchased for her last birthday. Mrs. Palmer helped arrange her hair, pinning it up with tortoise-shell combs. "You look lovely, my dear," Mrs. Palmer said, studying the finished effect. "I haven't seen that dress before." "I was saving it for a special occasion," Catherine admitted. Mrs. Palmer smiled knowingly but said nothing further. The dinner at the Harrington Ranch was more elaborate than Catherine had anticipated. The long dining table was set with fine china and silver, and the guests included the mayor, the bank president and his wife, the newspaper editor, and several ranchers from neighboring properties. Daniel greeted her at the door, dressed in a well-cut suit that transformed his appearance from rugged rancher to polished gentleman. Something in his eyes when he looked at her made Catherine's breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm to lead her inside. Throughout dinner, Catherine found herself seated at Daniel's right, a position of honor that didn't go unnoticed by the other guests. The conversation flowed around topics of local interest: the coming railroad, the fall cattle prices, plans for expanding the town school. Catherine contributed thoughtfully to the discussions, drawing on her Eastern education and fresh perspective. She noticed Daniel watching her with approval as she tactfully mediated a disagreement between the mayor and the newspaper editor regarding town improvements. After dinner, while the gentlemen enjoyed cigars on the porch, Catherine wandered back to the flower garden, now silvered by moonlight. The night air carried the sweet scent of roses, and she breathed deeply, savoring the peace of the moment. "It's even more beautiful at night, isn't it?" Daniel's voice came from behind her. Catherine turned, smiling. "It is. The moonlight transforms everything." He moved to stand beside her at the low stone wall. "You impressed everyone tonight." "Did I impress you, Mr. Harrington?" The words slipped out before she could reconsider them. In the moonlight, his eyes seemed darker, more intense. "You've impressed me from the first day, Miss Montgomery. Your courage in coming here alone, your willingness to work, your kindness to my injured man. You're unlike any woman I've met." Catherine felt her heart quicken at his words. "I find you equally impressive, Mr. Harrington. You've built something remarkable here." "Daniel," he said softly. "I think, at this point, you might call me Daniel." "Catherine," she offered in return. His hand found hers in the darkness, his fingers warm against her skin. "Catherine," he repeated, as if testing the sound of her name. "I know you came west seeking independence, not entanglements." "Some entanglements might be worth the risk," she said quietly. He moved closer, his free hand gently touching her cheek. "May I?" he asked, his voice hardly more than a whisper. Catherine nodded, and his lips met hers in a gentle kiss that sent warmth flooding through her. When they parted, she remained in the circle of his arms, feeling for the first time that she had truly found her place. "I've been alone a long time," Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. "I never expected to find someone who would understand this life, who would see the beauty in it as well as the hardship." "I never expected to find someone who would see me, truly see me," Catherine replied. Behind them, the sounds of guests departing broke the moment. Daniel stepped back, though his hand remained clasped with hers. "We should return to the house." As they walked back, he said, "I'll be riding into town tomorrow. Perhaps we could continue our conversation?" Catherine smiled up at him. "I'd like that very much." Over the following weeks, Daniel became a frequent visitor at the hotel. Their courtship progressed with the directness characteristic of frontier life, unencumbered by the elaborate social rituals Catherine had known in Philadelphia. They rode together across his land, Daniel pointing out improvements he planned and asking Catherine's opinion. He brought books from his substantial library when he learned of her love for literature, and they spent evenings discussing favorite authors. Catherine continued her work at the hotel, implementing changes that improved efficiency and comfort. Word spread of the hotel's excellent management, and travelers increasingly chose Willowbrook Hotel over competing establishments in nearby towns. One evening, as autumn approached, Daniel invited Catherine to the ranch for a private dinner. His housekeeper had outdone herself with a meal that rivaled any Philadelphia restaurant, served by candlelight in the formal dining room. After dinner, Daniel led Catherine to the parlor, where a fire crackled warmly in the hearth. He seemed uncharacteristically nervous, pacing before finally taking a seat beside her on the sofa. "Catherine," he began, taking her hands in his. "When I first saw you at the hotel, I thought you were just another Eastern lady who would soon flee back to civilization. I never imagined you would become so essential to my life." Catherine's heart raced as she recognized the gravity in his tone. "You've become essential to mine as well." "I know you came west seeking independence," he continued, "and I would never want to diminish that spirit in you. It's one of the things I admire most." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "But I've been thinking about partnerships, how the right one doesn't diminish either person, but makes both stronger." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. "This was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold ring set with a single diamond. "I'm asking if you would consider another kind of partnership, one where your independence remains intact, but where we face life's challenges and joys together." Tears blurred Catherine's vision as she looked from the ring to his face. "Are you asking me to marry you, Daniel Harrington?" "I am," he confirmed, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "I'm asking if you'll make a life with me here, helping to build something that will last, something that's ours together." Catherine thought of the path that had led her here, from her constrained life in Philadelphia to the freedom she'd found on the frontier. In Daniel, she had discovered not someone who sought to control her, but a partner who valued her strength and intelligence. "Yes," she said simply, joy rising within her. "Yes, I will." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms for a kiss that promised a lifetime of shared dreams. Mrs. Palmer's delight at their engagement was unrestrained. "I knew from the moment you two first spoke," she declared. "Some things are simply meant to be." The wedding took place in Willowbrook's small church as the first snowfall of the season dusted the mountains. Catherine wore a cream-colored silk dress with her mother's lace veil, and Daniel stood tall and proud in a new suit ordered from Denver. The entire town turned out for the celebration that followed, with tables of food set up in the hotel dining room and music provided by local fiddlers. Catherine danced with her new husband, laughing as he twirled her around the cleared space, his usual reserve dissolved in happiness. "Are you happy, Mrs. Harrington?" Daniel asked as they took a moment's rest from the dancing. Catherine looked around at the community that had become her home, then back to the man who had captured her heart. Completely, she assured him. "This is exactly where I'm meant to be." Later, as they rode to the ranch in a carriage decorated with ribbons by the townsfolk, Catherine rested her head on Daniel's shoulder. The winter stars shone brilliantly above them, and ahead lay the home they would share, a life built on mutual respect and love, in a land where both could flourish. "Welcome home, Catherine," Daniel said softly as the ranch house came into view, windows glowing with welcoming light. Catherine squeezed his hand, her heart full. In seeking independence, she had found something even more precious, a partnership of equals, a love that strengthened rather than confined. The frontier had indeed offered her the fresh start she sought, in ways she could never have imagined.